Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Mom's Favorites, Books My Mother Loved, a memorial for my mother, who, passed away now, wow, more than, 2 years ago. Anyways, it's been a while, but we're still plugging away at the list that I had my father give me right after she passed. So, last time I was doing this, we started in on Mary Stewart's series, which begins with the Crystal Caves, and now we move on to the second in the series, The Hollow Hills. This is the cover of the edition that I read, but we lost our dust jacket, so this is actually a copy off of the internet, not like my actual dust jacket. Because I don't know where ours is, and I prefer not to show a blank cloth cover if I don't have to. So, this book does pick up right where the Crystal Cave left off. Now, the Crystal Cave, we have the story of Merlin as a child, and he finds out that eventually he finds out that his father is Ambrosius, who becomes the King of Britain, and then he winds up taking service with his father because he is a bastard, that is, a child born out of wedlock. But, his father acknowledges him as his son and everything. He just, can't pass the title on. And also, Merlin, Emrys, Mervyn, whatever you want to call him, isn't particularly interested in ruling anyways. It's not really where his talents are. He is, in fact, something of a sorcerer, but he's not a sorcerer like you see in, Disney or traditionally with fire and superpowers. He seems to pretty much be a guy who has visions and is a really good engineer and doctor. And so there's a lot in these books. There is actual, magic in it, but a lot of this is not magic so much as a guy who's being super thinky and has a few visions on the way that give him particular directions for his thinkiness. Anyways, so the first book is all about Merlin, full stop. This book, while being all about Merlin, is about how Merlin makes sure that after the future King Arthur is born, that he is sent away to somewhere where he can be raised in safety, that Arthur will be raised somewhere that he'll, have an education such that a king would need. And eventually, he finds Arthur or rather goes to where Arthur is and sets himself up nearby and is there to give Arthur a certain amount of tutoring and education in things that he's not going to run into in the backwoods of nowhere estate where he's being raised. So there's a lot in this book of Merlin wandering, of Merlin figuring out what he's going to do with the child. And the thing is, after Ambrosius dies, his brother, Uther, winds up taking the crown because, well, he's next in line because, as I said, Merlin, A, isn't in the line of succession because he was born out of wedlock, and B, really, really, really doesn't want it anyways. But Uther winds up being king and is High King for a good while and is a pretty decent king as such things go. He doesn't have the vision of his older brother, but that's fine because he's kind of an interregnum between the one who had vision in Ambrosius and the one who's going to have vision again in Arthur. It's not really an interregnum because there is a king, but it's sort of like an interregnum. Anyways, so there's a lot in this book that is just sort of Merlin passing the time, getting through, going through things and and just watching things happen. For part of the book, he goes a wandering in the east. He goes out to Constantinople. He goes to Rome. He goes to see a whole bunch of, far places so that he can learn things that he couldn't learn in Britain. And he winds up finding out exactly how much of a backwood Britain actually is, at least at that time in history. The interesting thing is that Mary Stewart is trying very, very hard here to place King Arthur and Merlin and everything in the real world. She's trying very, very hard to do this, and she's got an end note in which she talks about this, and she talks about the fact that this period in time, around 700 AD-ish, give or take, is a time in which there are very, very few records. There are very few reliable records. And so with the consistency of the history of the quote-unquote histories, she's very clear in her little end note that as far as she's concerned, that here we go, that a tradition is so persistent and as immortal and self-perpetuating as the stories of the Arthurian legend. There must be a grain of fact behind even the strangest of tales which have gathered around the meager central facts of Arthur's existence. So what she's done is she's taken what little actual history she has, or that was available in the 1970s when she was writing this, 1960s and 70s, because the publication date on this book is, in point of fact, 1973, so possibly just information available in the 60s. But she's taking that information about how things were and how they existed at that time and trying to sort of stitch together an actual reality for this, that this is not the Victorian King Arthur, where you have a lot of fuzziness around the edges, where you have a lot of things that have sort of been smoothed away to meet up with, then modern perspectives on things. She's trying very hard to localize this within the time. So, among other things, Britain in the year 500 AD is very, very the opposite of cosmopolitan. You have somebody from Britain and they go to London, Londinium, and they think it's the most grand and amazing city in the world, and that's just because they've never been over to Paris, which is far bigger and far more exciting, or even further to Rome or Constantinople, which are these cities which are genuinely enormous and have a very genuine, significant history that had gone back 1,000 years before before the then present. And so there's a sort of this discovery of that sort of thing that goes on. But there's a lot here that what she's doing is filling out Merlin's story. And that's the thing, is that Merlin is traditionally a shadowy figure. He's a figure about which we know nothing. We don't actually really know where he came from. We don't know what he did when he was a child. Traditionally, he's the old man who kind of shows up and hangs out at Arthur's elbow. And, right behind him, being something of a power behind the throne, being, providing wisdom or what have you. And so this is an attempt to sort of make a story of Arthur a story of Merlin, rather, that makes him into a real and rounded character. And one of the interesting things, of course, one of the things that makes him a bit of a Mary Sue in some ways, and yet it makes perfect logical sense, is the way that he's absolutely never afraid that he's going to die. He's never afraid of anything, but as he says in the first book and in this one, he actually knows the exact time and place of his death. He knows when it's going to happen, and since it's not happening now, he's not worried. And it's one of those things that he does again and again in the course of these books, and so it gives him this false sense of calm, this false sense of knowing better than everybody, because he has nothing to fear, because he already knows where his personal dangers are and doesn't need to worry about it. So the book opens with a servant of Uther's queen having been sent to stay with Merlin, and basically Merlin waiting for the Queen Igraine to give birth to Arthur, and goes through the 9 months of waiting for that, to the night that he actually finds Arthur and brings the baby safely to a place in sufficient obscurity for the boy to be raised a few years before he's then properly fostered, with Sir Ector, who is, a minor nobleman out in the middle of nowheres, that nobody would ever expect. And in the process of doing things, Merlin then winds up setting up a sort of a false lead, telling people, oh yes, he's on the Isle of Glass, which is out in Wales. And no, the kid's nowhere near Wales, but he just, tells everybody the rumor that the kid is out there. And he goes traveling to the Far East, or, well, to the East, Middle East, I suppose, really. And, in the hopes that everybody thinks that he's dragging the kid with him out to Constantinople and Rome. And, eventually he comes back, and he has several meetings with Uther along the way in this book. Meetings in which Uther at first says, I want you to take that kid out of the way. I don't want people counting months. I don't want anything. He is my heir until I have another son, but I want a son who I can, hand the throne to free and clear. And Merlin is sitting there thinking, and I'm very carefully not going to tell him that he will never have another son, because I know perfectly well that this one is going to be king. So, So he has several meetings with Uther along the way, including the meeting that he winds up going to when Uther is suffering from not being able to have sex with women anymore, because he's having an unfortunate stretch where he took a wound to the groin area and things aren't working properly. But eventually that starts working again, and Merlin winds up commenting that perhaps all he needed was to stop stressing about it, in effect. Anyway, and of course, near the end of this book, we get the seeds of Arthur's doom, which is, of course, Mordred, because Mordred is the child of Arthur and his half-sister, and the author, of course, sets this up with the half-sister as the villain, because Morgause is traditionally a villainess, and she seduced her half-brother, aware that he was her half-brother, for the purposes of getting pregnant with this child. Arthur, has no idea she's his half-sister, because he's wound up under the impression that Merlin is his father, and that's a wonderful moment of disenchantment of, wait, you've never slept with a woman? Then if you're not my father, then who is? It just, you feel bad for the kid, because he thinks he's finally found his father, and then no. Anyways, I think that I have rambled pointlessly and said barely anything at all about the actual book. So I guess that is everything, and I will see you all next week.